Hi. So, how many of you noticed that Second Chronicles is Second Chronicles to First Kings is as First Chronicles to the book of Samuel, First and Second Samuel. So basically, it's like the story from a Chronicles from is now Solomon's story from the chronicler's point of view. Did I say that right? Yes, Samuel first and second Samuel was to First Chronicles and Second Chronicles is to Solomon. So this is basically Solomon's story from the chronicler's point of view, and as usual, we see a bit more detail than we did yesterday when we read First Kings 3. Solomon fulfilled his promise, the promises that God made to David, that his son would establish his heir on the throne of Israel. So Solomon was that fulfillment for David. He was a man of rest, unlike his father David, who was a man of war and fought many battles. As they say, Solomon was just living the soft life. Israel enjoyed years of peace during his reign, and his kingdom was established with God with wisdom and prophecy. Did you notice that the chronicler didn't mention that Solomon sacrificed to idols? Instead, he emphasized Solomon's role in sacrificing at Gibeon, implying that the people actively supported and participated in his activities in Gibeon. So now we see that chronicler, even though perhaps not biased, because we saw that also in the book of First Chronicles, when that chronicle, well, if it was the same person, was talking about David, he just focused on David's, military conquest and his, lineage, and also I think Chronicles is like the clean version of like the activities of, so minus all the extra stuff. They're just trying to make it, clean, and they're not trying to distract you with any unnecessary details. So which is why you see that we're reading them side by side so that we get more insight as we go along. There was a bit more detail about Solomon's military and economic power here. We see that he starts acquiring and hoarding horses, which he mostly imports from Egypt and Keve, purchased expensive chariots from there using agents and exporting them to the kings of the Hittites and of Syria. Now, these were all people who were enemies at the time. So for now, I first thought, like, why is this guy liaising with the enemy? But remember, this was a season of peace. So maybe because they were, enjoying peaceful times, there was no need to, be separate from your enemies. I'm not sure. But all that just didn't sound right to me, especially in light of God's command in Deuteronomy 17:16, which concerning the principles of governing kings, which clearly states, "But he shall not multiply horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. For the Lord has said to you, you shall not return that way again." But I thought about it. I was like, you see how sometimes you kind of you kind of do what you need to do without kind of crossing the line. So I went back and I read and realized that he said he procured those horses via agents. So perhaps those agents weren't Israelites, because he was like, the Lord said, don't send them back there. So how about somebody go back there and get the horses for me? I don't know. Nevertheless, cutting corners is still disobedience. It's still an act of disobedience, and clearly Solomon was amassing wealth, women, and horses, and liaising with Egypt, which were all against God's commands. Psalm 72, the subscription of this psalm describes it as one written by Solomon, and certainly verse 1 to 4 seems to support this, because we know that he reigned in wisdom and understanding to judge God's people. He requested wisdom and understanding to judge God's people, and that was what the beginning of the psalm said from verse 1 to 4. But the last line of the psalm in verse 20 says, "The prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are ended." So there's two schools of thought when it comes to this psalm, right? One is that it was written by Solomon, and the end prophesied of David's death. And then the other is that it was written by David for Solomon and signed by him, David. That's why it ended saying the prayers of David, son of Jesse, is done. But it's all about the blessings of a king, asking God to grant the king all the things that he needs to rule with God's help through prayer. So it doesn't really matter who wrote it. That's the central theme. And here's what I learned about God from there. We don't need to shy away from praying and asking God for things. His heart towards us is one of abundant generosity. Look how Solomon, in spite of himself, didn't go to the Lord to ask for anything. Instead, God came to him and asked him what he wanted and proceeded to give him that and so much more. Even when we're not asking him for anything, God still wants to hear from us. He's always wanting to display his heart of generosity towards. God lives to bless us and seeks out opportunities to do so. I hope you've learned something good, because I know I have. Tomorrow we'll continue with the Songs of Solomon. So we're going to finish one book tomorrow, the Songs of Solomon, chapters 1 to 8. See you here then. Take care. Bye.